Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining this Kuluna Irada webinar titled Lebanon-Israel Negotiations, Can a Durable Settlement be Achieved? Lebanon and Israel have entered a direct negotiating track for the first time in decades. Following 2 meetings in April under US auspices and an upcoming meeting in 2 days, the process remains vulnerable to disruption. Lebanon is seeking guarantees of a durable ceasefire, Israeli withdrawal, and the return of displaced residents, while Israel is pressing for concrete security commitments and a broader change in the status quo along the border. These negotiations are also unfolding within a wider regional war, which continues to shape both the incentives and the constraints facing the parties. For Lebanon, the diplomatic track can present a genuine opportunity for a breakthrough, particularly if it can secure sustained US engagement. But the country is entering these negotiations from a position of acute vulnerability. The state is attempting to pursue a diplomatic track while also confronting the question of weapons and state authority at home. It must do so amid a polarized domestic landscape, Hezbollah's opposition to the negotiation process, repeated threats of escalation, and severe institutional strain, while also facing Israeli occupation, continued military pressure, widespread destruction, and large-scale displacement. Together, these conditions have created a growing gap between policy ambition and implementation capacity, between what the Lebanese state may be willing to commit to diplomatically and what it can actually enforce on the ground. The central issue is how to translate this diplomatic opening into a credible pathway toward a durable political and security framework. Any viable path forward will depend on sequencing, mutual guarantees, and implementation capacity. So, what is a realistic negotiating roadmap for the Lebanese government? What can the Lebanese state credibly deliver on? What can the Lebanese armed forces implement, and what urgent operational and institutional bottlenecks would need to be addressed? And also, what role should the United States and its partners play to ensure that diplomacy does not outpace results on the ground? These are the questions that we will seek to address in our discussion today. And with us to address them are 3 distinguished speakers. MP Mark Daou, member of the Lebanese Parliament and of the Taqaddum Party, General Khalil Helou, retired Lebanese Army Brigadier General and Associate Professor at St. Joseph University of Beirut, and Mr. David Schenker, Taube Senior Fellow, the Washington Institute, and former US Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us today. It's a pleasure. And Mark, if we could start with you, maybe with the framing of these talks. So the 3rd round of talks between Lebanon and Israel is being held in 2 days. What is Lebanon seeking to achieve from this round, and what are the main constraints shaping its position?
Okay. Thank you for having me. And I think this is a very good discussion to be having at this time. Obviously, the Lebanese state has been cautiously expanding its engagement with the negotiations. After the first preliminary discussions in DC, the second in the Oval Office with President Trump, the third has definitely been turned up a notch with the attendance of a head of the delegation, Ambassador Simon Karam, as well as a military attaché. So the team negotiating now is expanding, which is an indicator of applying various topics to try and sustain the cessation of hostilities, or at least the declaration which was issued before by the State Department. Because today, sustaining the ceasefire, to be able to build on that towards a negotiation that can kick off with enough momentum to try and implement a full ceasefire and allow for the political process to proceed is the critical item. And I think for the Lebanese state, what they're going to look for in DC this time is to give legitimacy to the process even more, not only by increasing representation, but some tangible results in terms of containment after the serious escalations. Yesterday, the Israelis, at least today, they announced that they ventured north of the yellow line into the village of Zawt al-Shari'i. And then the strike in Beirut on the leader of Rudwan, Ballout. So basically, there has been a rapid escalation. So now you need to maintain that agreement that was reached before, or at least the framework which was agreed before, because you need that legitimacy for the state to move forward further in that discussion. And I think the expansion of the team, the transition to more technical talks on the ground with the military attaché and others, a continuation of the previous discussions which happened between Simon Karam and Resnick and the Israelis when Morgan Ortagus was still involved in the file early on in the year before they were stopped with the war. And then setting the framework for how a political agreement or a process can be built. I know the priorities of the Lebanese state are the return of all the lands as well as the ability of citizens to go back to their villages. And these are two critical items that the Lebanese state is trying to get some progress on.
Thank you, Mark. General, actually, David, if we want to present the other perspective from the other side, what is the United States seeking to achieve from this round? And what does Israel want out of it at this stage? And what are the concessions, if any, that Israel is prepared to present at this stage?
Well, it's good to be with you. Certainly, this is quite a timely panel. Listen, I think that while the administration has presented, very ambitious agenda, I think I have relatively low expectations of this round. I think we perhaps can get to some sort of statement about what both sides support that are common goals, perhaps defining what next steps are in terms of either priorities or what can be done in the near term, what are longer term issues, starting to set out a roadmap for how to move ahead. I mean, this is still, we are essentially, where we were in November of 2024, right? Lebanon says they want Israel out. They want prisoners returned. They want a permanent ceasefire. And Israel says what it said before. It doesn't want the IRGC occupying a neighboring state. It wants a state that is accountable, responsible, and is the agency that has a monopoly on the use of violence and on the control of the weapons in the state. And so they can perhaps talk about sequencing, but I think quite frankly, it's a bit premature to talk about commitments from Israel. What is the commitment from Lebanon? We've heard the government of Lebanon make, I think, extremely compelling and brave statements about the illegality of Hezbollah's weapons, about the necessary end of IRGC presence in Lebanon, and PNGing the Iranian ambassador to Beirut. And none of those things have happened. So this is, talking about perhaps what each side can do and recognizing the constraints on all sides. For Lebanon, Hezbollah has murdered 25 politicians, journalists, civil society activists, opponents since 2005. And so it's, obviously risky to move ahead with this agenda. It's an election year in Israel as well. So I think, in the very near term, I think we have to have realistic, sort of scaled back expectations of what can be now. There's what can be done now. I think there's a lot that can be done in terms of talking about sequencing and what type of commitments, mutual commitments can be made going forward, and how to measure the implementation of those commitments. I think that's the kind of thing that can be achieved, perhaps, in this third meeting.
So sequencing and talk about what kind of mutual commitments can be offered in the future. That's what we can expect.
And then points of mutual agreement.
And points of mutual agreement. Okay, thank you, David. We'll get back to those points and maybe discuss them in more detail. But before that, I'd like to move to General Khalil Hello. General, of course, I mean, as we've mentioned before, these entire negotiations are taking place as a US-Iran conflict is also unfolding. So how does the broader US-Iran conflict dynamic affect this round of negotiations between Lebanon and Israel?
Well, first of all, thank you for this session. This is an opportunity to exchange ideas and some positions. Now, regarding the conflict between Iran and the US, the problem is the Iranian mind that is considering that Lebanon is a part of this war. They declared it frankly and openly, and they remind us of this every now and then. And the question or the issue of the RGC in Beirut and the Iranian ambassador has been raised by David, and we all know what's about. Now, the conflict between Iran and the US is a matter, let's say, is weakening Iran. Now, Iran, the more it gets weakened and the more Hezbollah will be flexible. This is obvious, but till now, Iran is not showing any sign of flexibility, despite that they practically lost this war militarily. Now, today, I got the opportunity to look what's remaining of Iran's capabilities. Now, grosso modo, Iran still have 50% of the missiles it had before the war. It means 1,200 missiles, and this can do a lot of harm. And they also repaired a huge number of their launching pads of missiles. They had 460 before the war. And now they have operationally, according to Western sources, 240, which is a lot. So it means if the hostilities will get back again between the states, the United States and Iran, it will take time, because the first round of war took 41 days. To degrade the capabilities of Iran by 50%. So maybe we need to expect, if the hostilities are back, we have to expect a long time of hostilities. So the issue of the negotiations between Iran and the US is negative. I don't think that the Iranian will give up anything. They are trying to buy time, hoping that the US will get bothered, hoping that Trump will turn an eye to the foreseen elections, the economical pressure inside the US, and they are talking about that. Gallibaf yesterday talked about the economy in the US, and he was proud that he is getting involved in weakening the US economy. So in the middle of all this, I don't expect any result regarding the negotiations between Iran and the US. Now, the probability of the renewing of the hostilities is not for tomorrow, because President Trump will go to China to discuss with his counterpart there. Iran, of course, will be one of the issues, not the main one, but it will be one of the issues. And we hope that China needs much more the US than it needs Iran. So maybe the Chinese role from the backseat will let's say, will achieve something with Iran. So if that happens, and if, only if, we may see a flexibility regarding Hezbollah. But Hezbollah is declaring and acting as if the war is continuing. They refuse any negotiation. And till now, I agree totally with David. I have no high expectations regarding the negotiations between Lebanon and Israel in the middle of this situation.
Thank you. David, two very interesting points were raised by General Hello. First, that Iran has lost this round of the war, but also that Iran will give nothing at this stage. Do you agree with these 2 points? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the general was referring to Iran giving nothing to the United States in terms of concession on nuclear missiles, Hormuz, et cetera. Is that right, Khalil?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's right. You know, the regime believes that it's doing quite well, suffering economically, no doubt. The blockade is having a severe impact on Iran. And yet they think in this sort of, you know, issue of time that they have an advantage. I think they overstate the impact of the economics on the United States, although, you know, $4.50 for a gallon of gas is, you know, 30-40% increase. It's substantial, but President Trump's not up for re-election. And I don't think he has much concern about the midterm elections. I think he understands that incumbent parties in the White House do very poorly during congressional midterms. And the Iranians are prepared to wait this out, to let it play out. And you know, the president's on his way to China. There won't be a military escalation in the next couple of days, but perhaps on his way back, I think there's a certain level of rising frustration, but I don't think he is necessarily inclined to do so. I think he'd like a deal. But he's also constrained in that, constrained in the fact that, you know, he can't end this war with Iran having any more control over Hormuz than they had before. And he can't end this war releasing frozen assets and providing sanctions relief. That would be in excess of what President Obama did in the JCPOA. The important part for Lebanon of all this is, of course, that Iran, in any event, would not make any concession on its number one proxy in the region. You know, degraded, no doubt, but Iran is not prepared to take any steps to further weaken or jettison Hezbollah, notwithstanding everything that has happened to Iran, that has happened to Hezbollah, that has happened to Lebanon. You know, they're a tool of Iran, and they've proven that they are willing at any cost to serve Iran. And that for them is quite valuable.
Mike, I want to build on that last point that David made. I mean, many in the Lebanese political class argue that any serious prospect of Hezbollah's disarmament ultimately depends on Iran accepting to basically give up on its regional proxies as part of a broader deal. David seems to think that this is, I mean, not probable anytime in the future. So
No, I said impossible.
Impossible. Okay, so he said that it's impossible. So first of all, do you agree that this is impossible? And if this is not realistic, then what alternative pathway do you see?
Okay. I definitely agree. I think Hezbollah has time and again proven they're an extension of IRGC, and the Lebanon agenda part of Hezbollah is not completely dominant or can redirect the actions of the party. And the decision to enter this war and the current statement today of Naim Qasim just reiterates that exact thing. And I think the political pressure that is happening inside Lebanon from some political parties and others to try and again try to link Lebanon to as if it's completely without a state, or to give excuses for the state not to act under the premise of social unrest or a return of the civil war, etc., is again trying to undermine the processes of the state actually taking state decisions and properly implementing. And for me, regaining that role is not only about the issues of the military actions. That is fundamental and a top priority, but it's also being capable to sustain its decisions of direct negotiations, being able to define a framework for an agreement, being able to agree on steps to accumulate so they move forward. And therefore, I think there are alternatives to replacing the capabilities of Iran through Hezbollah to intervene in a final endgame in Lebanon, and a movement to actually contain Hezbollah and gradually disarm it. And by disarming, it's not only about the weapons. Again, we're talking about Qard al-Hassan, the financial support. We're talking about the public services networks. We're talking about the supply of money. And we're also talking about the ability of the state to function politically, diplomatically, and militarily independently of the priorities there. So for me, I think large steps have been taken. The decisions taken by the state now are actually challenging the premise on which the Hezbollah state was built. And that premise said, we do not admit there's a state called Israel. We are in constant war with that state, and there is nothing in the world that will change our position. Thus, every means of fighting that state is viable, and therefore weapons is one of those tools, and we build everything around around the concept of we're going to war with Israel. What the current president, prime minister, and government are basically saying, no, we're changing that operating system. And that operating system is shifting towards Israel as a state that is next to us, and we need to get to an agreement with them. And negotiating at the highest level in a direct format is admitting that that is a state and we need to get to an agreement. And I think this is how the decisions of 5 August and then the decision on the 2nd of March and the kicking out of the Iranian ambassador, or at least the delegitimizing or withdrawing the agreement that allowed him to come into the country in the first place, are all steps that are starting to build in an operating system. And I think this is where political parties and political forces internally will have to take decisions on which operating system they want to actually function in this country. And this is where supporting the current negotiations, building on them, expanding the team, going into details, starting to change the discussion in Lebanon all about what are the terms of the agreement that would allow for a cessation of hostilities and eventually reaching an agreement to end the war and build a path towards peace. That is the fundamental necessity now. And I think this is a strategic shift, not a quick decision, nor something that will be finalized in a few months, especially now, as David just rightly mentioned, the election year in Israel. So one of the big questions, who are we dealing with? Will Netanyahu go for a harsh push on Lebanon to try to get an agreement to show that he can end wars, not only start them? Or is he going to take a different strategy that will win him votes, which is basically, let's open all the wars possible and become even more belligerent on Iran and on Lebanon. So basically, he goes as a wartime leader for the coming election in 6 months. Those will have more repercussions on Lebanon than what Iran decides, honestly, because Iran doesn't have options except to use Hezbollah for the fight until it cuts a deal that serves its own interests.
Thank you, Mike. You focused a lot on the state has to do something. The state has already taken important steps. I want to build on this with General Khalil Halou. General, the state, we all know the state has to deliver, but we also all know that the state has a real capacity problem. What realistically can we expect the state to do, particularly on the disarmament agenda? And what role can the LAF have here? Because we know that the disarmament of Hezbollah is a task that's much bigger than only the LAF to take on. It's much wider. But what can the state realistically do? And what can the LAF's role be?
Now, the LAF is the last string in a long chain. So we are starting from the wrong end. The first ring of this chain should be a clear strategy of the Lebanese state. There is no strategy, unfortunately. And if someone will tell me that you have two Hezbollah ministers and two Amal movement ministers within the government that will prevent any strategy, I counter agree by saying that the other ministers are totally paralyzed. Before four ministers, I don't believe that. Now let me go practical. You know, and I know, that there is a huge, I will not say a majority, there is a huge number of citizens and of political parties and of regions in Lebanon that want the Lebanese state to assert itself and let's say assert the sovereignty of the state in their areas. There is a popular support for this. There is a popular support for the LAF, despite everything you are hearing about the LAF. There is still confidence between the general population and the LAF. Now, why don't we start by asserting the Lebanese authority, the Lebanese sovereignty in areas where Hezbollah is not prevalent, where Hezbollah is unpopular? Let's talk about Beirut. The government decided to disarm Beirut. And what we are seeing is the opposite. Why? And everyone is now blaming the LAF. The LAF is not following the orders of the government. Now, when you are a cadet in your first days in any military academy, you know that when you issue orders or when you receive orders, these orders should be doable. They should be, let's say, feasible. Now, when you assign this mission to the army, before securing the mission politically, I think that the majority of the members of parliament of Beirut, they want the army to deploy. I think that the majority of the ministers in the government, they want the army to deploy, to disarm, and to assert the state sovereignty. Yeah, this is obvious. And we have in our institutions something called the High Council of Defense that is composed of the president, the prime minister, the minister of defense, the minister of economy, the minister of finance, and they can call any other minister to join them, and they can call any high-ranked officer in the security services in the army to join them. I didn't hear that this committee met once for 2 years. So there is a lack of, there is a laxism, there is a lack of responsibility, and there is no seriousness in any action they are doing. You start there, and then the army comes in the end. And when there will be a clash, because there will be a clash, it could be limited in Beirut, it could be limited in Beirut and Mount Lebanon and Tripoli and all these areas that want the state. You are securing this mission on the very high ranked level of the state. You don't assign this for the commander-in-chief that is 52 or 53 years old, and you are asking him to solve a problem that is 44 years old, that has roots in the region, and that has, let's say, a social, the Hezbollah is implemented socially everywhere. So when you open fire on a small squad of Hezbollah, the political repercussions will be huge. And you should be, I'm talking about the state, you should be there in order to absorb the shock and in order to manage it, not to let's say, to make the commander-in-chief accountable. This is the way it should be. And if I'm wrong, please correct me, anyone. And another thing, and we have a member of parliament with us. I didn't hear that the defense parliamentary committee met once for 2 years. And do you find it is normal? Do you find that it doesn't deserve a meeting to discuss all these issues? The war raging over all Lebanon and everywhere, and the absence of all these responsibles that it blinds the eyes. So this is the way I think. We should not stop by saying what do you need as vehicles and weapons in order to execute the mission. This is not the issue. The issue is somewhere else.
Okay, so what you said is, first, let the state start by reasserting its authority in areas where the citizens themselves want the state and feel
Exactly.
strongly that they are in support to the state. You gave Beirut as the main example, but you also, but in Beirut, you described that the people want to see the state. The state has actually taken a decision. Why hasn't it been able to actively enforce it? What is the issue there?
Yes, the issue, okay, yeah, they are talking about certain officers that are not following the orders. Okay, who appoints these officers? Who? It's the ministry, the Minister of Defense, the government. You know that some officers need a decree, a presidential decree to be appointed. Why don't they remove them? It will cause a political crisis. Yes, of course it will. Why do you want the battle to be in the streets and not on the table of the government or in the parliament? It deserves a battle, yes, but it should start there and not in the street and not with the bloodshed.
Clear. Thank you. David, going back to basically the negotiations, I mean, first of all, do you believe that Bibi Netanyahu wants peace with Lebanon?
Yeah, I think he wants to expand the Abraham Accords or the Circle of Peace. I think the most important priority is ending the threat posed by Hezbollah in Lebanon, and whether that is through an armistice, whether that's through the government taking actions to assert sovereignty. But yeah, the answer is yes. I mean, it's, years ago, Israelis would talk publicly about their dreams of going to see Petra in Jordan, right? Now you hear them saying they want to go eat hummus in Beirut. But this is more than this, right? There are still, 40,000 Israelis who haven't returned to their homes. Now that number pales in comparison to the million mostly Shiite, Shiites who had to leave the south because Hezbollah started a war with Israel. But he wants to secure his country, the citizens of Israel. And so, the answer to that is yes. I mean, I know that there's all kinds of talk about Netanyahu wanting to keep going with the wars because otherwise he's going to be prosecuted for the crimes, et cetera, that he's accused of. So be it. But I think that if provided the opportunity, he's going to invest time and political capital if there is a partner in Lebanon that is willing to take some risks as well, beyond making excellent statements.
Okay, but we're in a deadlock here, right? Because from the Lebanese perspective, I mean, Israel's military occupation and continued destruction in South Lebanon is making it very difficult for the Lebanese state to negotiate and to take steps forward. And of course, as you mentioned, from the Israeli perspective, the Lebanese state's inability to confront Hezbollah makes any Lebanese guarantees hard to take seriously.
Yeah,
so how can this deadlock be overcome?
Let's not say inability, right? We can also, there's a big debate about ability
until the moment
versus will.
Okay.
Right. Let's leave that question open. We can talk about that another time. Yeah, I mean, it's always a question of who moves first, right? Hezbollah started the war. There was a ceasefire. Hezbollah started the first war. There was a ceasefire. The government of Lebanon made commitments to disarm Hezbollah. It sort of did a lackadaisical half-ass effort in the south to, with Hezbollah's permission. and then refused to move on, right? This was the army decision. They said, we're not going to do anything north of Litani. So, now we have another nominal ceasefire because Hezbollah broke the ceasefire on behalf of Iran. And you're saying, well, the problem here is that there's Israeli occupation. And the Israelis would say, well, the problem is there's a non-state actor that is a proxy, IRGC proxy, that continues to threaten Israel. I have news for you. This shouldn't be a surprise, but Israel's not going to leave Lebanon without the government of Lebanon taking some serious steps. And it's not just showing up and saying, hey, we're going to be a state. It's showing up and saying we're going to be a state and starting to assert sovereignty, sometimes by potentially clashing with Hezbollah. We can talk about reciprocal steps and that Israel, responding. And I think that's absolutely necessary. If Lebanon does something toward asserting sovereignty, but in particular toward the disarmament of Hezbollah, I think, this is what the negotiating partners have to map out. What is Israel going to do when Lebanon starts doing this? But going in as an opening position that Israel has to leave Lebanon before you do anything, that's not the way it works. We were here in 2024, right? Why? They're not going to do this based on yet another commitment of Lebanon someday to take on this very difficult task of confronting Hezbollah, whether militarily or otherwise. There's a lot of things the government of Lebanon has to do. So once again, chicken or the egg. I think it's a matter of sequencing, but this has to be. It's not going to be Israel emptying out and leaving and going back to their side of the border and saying, "Okay, Lebanon, what are you going to do now?" But that's not how this is going to work. Nor is it how it should work.
Thanks, David. Mark, I want to build on that with you. I mean, the Lebanese authorities are in a weak position. We know that, right? Internally, you have the pressure from Hezbollah, and externally, you have the pressure and the occupation from Israel. So what are they realistically able to do? David talked about sequencing, about steps. What is the Lebanese government realistically able to put on the table as a first step? Basically, what would constitute a realistic milestone or a series of realistic milestones for this negotiation effort? And what type of support would Lebanon need to be able to navigate this effort?
Okay. Allow me just to respond to what General Hello just mentioned. I'm an active member of the Defense Committee in Parliament. I have asked repeatedly for meetings as well as General Assemblies to discuss the negotiations, the war, and all of that. In addition to public statements that I've issued to the head of the Defense Committee. And unfortunately, till now, I think it is no accident that Speaker Birri is not activating Parliament except for the General Amnesty Law, which is an anomaly in the system that someone can open Parliament for 3 days a week with 2 sessions a day, but everything else is stalled and no committees are meeting. This is not by accident. I think Birri, again, is trying to define the political agenda in the country by literally allowing only the subjects that he wants to keep the people focused on and avoiding other things. So that's just on the side. I don't think this is an issue of chicken and egg. I think the more capable side that holds all the initiative is Israel. Just to be very, very clear. They are the more capable side. They are the ones actively occupying Lebanon and bombing the hell out of Lebanon. Therefore, I think it's not only an issue of military, because militarily they can keep on doing what they've done for the past 60 years and end up with the same results, which do not reach a conclusion that is suitable for Lebanon or for Israel, for that fact. Therefore, I think if they're seriously engaging in building a political process, then we would see a fast-track development on the Israeli sides with options and plans and others. And I think that was the initial approach back in 2024 when we started hearing about civilian diplomatic-led negotiations with Lebanon, which I think is a good approach. And finally, we're there. And now we're trying to make use of it. But again, you need to give legitimacy to the weaker side, which is the Lebanese state, which has limited options, that is obviously taking a leap into the unknown through the decisions that they've taken. They're changing the framework, changing the operating system, having issues with military officers and others and the appointments, allowing for those tasks so they increase their efficiency with the limited capabilities that they have and the limited abilities that they have. We're talking here, and we all suffer from the same thing. Even 1,000 people sleeping in tents in Biel on the waterfront of Beirut requires a political process for the state to get those out, so there are no intensification of sectarian conflicts, etc. So we don't lose the big game for small battles. And these are the reasons those things take time to solve internally, so you don't get busy with side battles while you're trying to fight the main one. This takes me back to what I just started with in Parliament. Picking a fight on 1,000 people staying in Biel, or about the general amnesty law, or about everything else, those are not happening by accident. They're happening because they're trying to instigate conflicts as much as possible with attacks on the prime minister or on the president himself to try and intensify sectarian clashes in Lebanon by Hezbollah and their allies, or even the Berri and the others aligned in that position that try to undermine any process where the state becomes the dominant decision maker. And here I mean exactly the president and the prime minister. So I think Israel has the initiative here, and Israel can do a lot more in cutting some slack to the Lebanese state because they're taking the right decisions and they need the resources to be able to take actions. Yes, they cannot disarm Hezbollah in a direct confrontation, but the will, I think, has been determined that it's there now. Can all military operations, as well as intelligence operations, as well as state institutions, fall in line? This is the problem with the deep state that for 40 years has been serving the interests and protecting Hezbollah, which I think here we can start identifying bits and pieces. And I'll just give you a small example. 2 days ago, or a few days ago, the prime minister visited Syria. A couple of days before that, the minister of energy went to Egypt. If we provide electricity 2-3 more hours, that's credibility. And this is related to the ability of the state to actually execute and get the right support to be able to do that. Same thing happens if we're covering hospitalization, education, and others in Lebanon. Then the state starts assuming more and more roles that are directly impacting citizens. Reconstruction, return, and disarmament then become linked to that. So my idea is those steps need to accumulate, and dismembering Hezbollah's influence over the state with very powerful allies such as Berri over parliament, those are not details, and those will definitely are needed by the state to do. Plus, I just finish off with my main message to your question. I think the more capable side is Israel. If Israel is serious about that, they will take more action steps to help the Lebanese state do what it's supposed to do, not directly help in the sense of agreeing. I think in the 60 Minutes interview that Netanyahu did, even he recognized that the Lebanese state they share common objectives, which I agree, me as a member of parliament with what I represent, I want to disarm Hezbollah immediately, and I consider them an extension of the IRGC. That's it.
Thank you, Mark. General Helou, before we move to you, because I want to discuss the security situation and the talks about the LAF splintering, etc. But I just want to go back to David for a second to close this loop. David, what do you see the US's role in this process, and in basically providing guarantees on both sides in order for us to overcome this deadlock, basically? What can the US put on the table in that regard?
Well, first and foremost, the U.S. has to be the arbiter and call balls and strikes. We had a couple months of sort of attempted or some attempts at collecting Hezbollah weapons in the south. Once again, with Hezbollah's permission, a lot of critiques of that effort. And the Lebanese armed forces said, "Oh no, we did everything. We were amazing." Israel and frankly some in the United States said, "Well, it was okay." The Lebanese armed forces was not proactive at all. If the government declared Hezbollah weapons to be illegal, then why is the state not starting to gather intelligence on these weapons or on Hezbollah? And so, I think you have to have a ground truth. That is, Lebanon's doing the job. Israel has to take corresponding steps that are meaningful. And we'd say meaningful and irreversible, but of course, I think we know that this can all be reversed, but meaningful steps in a certain direction to build a momentum. The United States also plays a role in, carrots and sticks, right? Israel listens to the United States, right? Netanyahu listens to the United States, right? After the 12-day war, the president said the war is over. And Iran violated the ceasefire. Israel is going to retaliate. The president turned the Israeli planes around. Likewise, the ceasefire with Lebanon, President Trump imposed that by tweet, right? There is some influence over Israeli actions. And of course, there's going to be some influence over Lebanese actions, which is, not only to say when Lebanon's doing it or not doing it. If they're not doing it, there's obstructions. The United States can roll out sanctions. The United States can incentivize, right? The United States provided more than $2 billion to Lebanese armed forces since 2005. Once again, I don't think this, aside from the issue of salaries that the United States should not and cannot actually legally be paying for the LAF, the gasoline, other capabilities, the United States can help out there. But I think ultimately this is more a matter of will than capabilities. There's things that the United States can do to hold both sides to account, and we did that and do that with other peace partners. We did it with the MFO and being sort of determining what's going on in the Sinai, et cetera. We can play a role. And I think the main thing here is that both sides are going to have to stay interested. And there's going to have to be a momentum, because this administration, we saw what happened early on. There was a great deal of attention paid to Lebanon. And then, this process of disarmament went nowhere. There was a loss of momentum, and there was a loss of U.S. interest. And all this focus on Syria, which seemed to have more promise, and no attention being paid to Lebanon, that could, once again, happen very easily.
Thank you, David. General Hello, I want to move to the internal security situation in the country. There are lots of talks about a risk of the LEF splintering, actually, if it goes into a direct confrontation with Hezbollah. What is your assessment of the situation? How probable is this? And I'm going to start also taking questions at the same time. I see here George Saade is also asking a related question. Are we in a position to assess at this stage the real military power of Hezbollah? Did they lose the biggest part of their weapons?
Okay, let me start by the last.
Yes.
Well, I will give facts. Okay. Now, since 2000 till now, I will not go back more than 2000. We had 3 major battles with Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And we didn't need any support for that. In 2000 in Danieh, in 2007 in Nahr al-Barid for 105 days, and in Fajr al-Jurud in 2017. And at that time, the LAF was shooting on Sunni extremists. And we didn't have any single desertion. And the soldiers performed extremely well. Just to give some numbers, in 2007, in the Battle of Nahr al-Bared, we lost 168 soldiers who fell in the theater of operation. 86 were Sunnis, and they were performing extremely well. Now, I know that there is a major factor that the popular support among the Sunni community for the army was huge. And the prime ministers of that time, Mr. Fuad Sanyura and thereafter Rafiq Hariri, Saad al-Hariri, and so were supporting the army. And this is why we performed extremely well. Now, let me go to the other side. Did we have clashes with Hezbollah? Yes, we already had. We had a first clash in the 90s, and I think it was around the Oslo summit, the Oslo, let's say, talks for the Palestinians. And some supporters of Hezbollah were shot and killed at the airport avenue. And then we had another one in Tayuni, okay? And we had a lot of small clashes that were, let's say, not reported on the media. And every time when we had a clash, the political intervention of the government and from outside the government were acting to release the arrested persons related to Hezbollah. And we did not have or hear that Shia soldiers were going to mutiny or refused to follow orders or things like that. I know that you cannot compare these small clashes with the Nahr al-Bared battle and the Fajr al-Jurud battle. But let me tell you one thing. The Lebanese army, let's say, splintered majorly in 1975, 1976, and another time in 1984. And I think that the lessons learned at that time became a culture within the institution that, first of all, this is very harmful individually for anyone. And then the army provides, let's say, a shelter to everyone. Now, I totally say it is unlikely to see Shia soldiers changing sides and going with Hezbollah and opening fire on their comrades. This is absolutely unlikely because the links, the personal links that are, let's say, the networking that happens or that occurs during the service is much more important and much more significant than the political belongings. Of course, among our Shia soldiers and officers, a lot of them are leaning toward Hezbollah or supporting Hezbollah. But there is a huge step between this and between desert and open fire on their comrades or declare secessions. We are not anymore in 1984. There is no more Soviet Union. Iran is far away. It will be no help for them if they do it. Every time the army splintered twice, there was a regional power or an international power that was behind that. This time, I don't see that these circumstances are the same than before. So, personally, I am totally confident that we will not face a situation like this. Now, of course, in the decision-making process, they are influenced, but their influence has a ceiling, and a threshold. And let me go further. Unfortunately, and I know this is not our topic of today, but I have to raise this issue. We have been occupied by the Syrians for 30 years. And during the second part of these 30 years, since 1990 till 2005, the Syrians were very influential in every institution. And they, let's say, they disseminated a culture within the LAF that was not, let's say, prevalent, but it is still there. A culture of doing nothing, a culture of following only orders. And you know, an officer without a decision-making capability is not an officer anymore. Now, today, things are changing, but this culture should be, let's say, unrooted from the army. And this is the job not only of the army, it is the job of the politicians. You know that every nomination in the army, every transfer of officers should pass by the political, unlike other armies, should pass by the political decision makers. I mean by that, the government and the ministers. So a job should be done regarding this. It is not done yet.
Thank you. Would you like to address the question on that George Saadi has raised? Are we in a position to assess at this stage the real military power of Hezbollah? And did they lose the biggest part of their weapons?
Well, unfortunately, Hezbollah does not say anything about its capabilities. And the only references we have are Western references or Israeli references. And many times they are not reliable. But I believe that Hezbollah has 40 years of experience in asymmetric wars. They are performing well objectively, and even the Israelis recognized that it is not easy to disarm Hezbollah. And the proof is that since the war started in South Lebanon, the Israelis did not make a huge, let's say, breakthrough. They are at distances varying between 10 and 20 kilometers from the border. If we compare that to 1982, in 3 days they were in Beirut, or in 1978, in a few days they were at Al Atashif. They didn't even, now they crossed the Litani River at the western side of the Al Atashif, the Beaufort Castle, that is a strategic position. And they are advancing very, let's say, slowly. And they are blaming the LAF that they did not do the job in a certain time. So, you know, Hezbollah is very powerful. And of course, they have been seriously degraded during this war, during the past 2 years. They lost a lot of human resources. They lost their long-range missiles, but they still have small capabilities that they are using very skillfully.
Thank you. Question to David from Eli Fernaini. So what Eli is saying is, with the current dynamics on the Lebanese front, I have a fear of a scenario where, similar to 1978, Israel's retention of a buffer zone in Lebanon and the continuity of seasonal attacks operations from the non-occupied areas of Lebanon. Question to David, what are the requirements to avoid this scenario?
Well, yeah, in many ways, history is repeating itself, right? Israel came in 78, 82. Back then, the PLO had these Katyusha rockets. Israel wanted a buffer zone to be so that these missiles couldn't hit northern Israel. And then they occupied this territory for a long time. They went to Beirut. They finished the PLO. They evacuated. And then they stayed. Listen, I think I don't believe that Israel really wanted to occupy, to have a large occupation with 5 divisions in South Lebanon. And yet, October 7th for Israel was, society changing. they decided not only with Lebanon, but with Syria, with Iran, that they were going to be proactive in their self-defense in the way they weren't. Hezbollah had eroded all elements of Israeli deterrence. They were pushing the envelope, flying drones into Israel, setting roadside bombs in Megiddo, 30 kilometers into Israel, setting up tents on the Israeli side of the border. And Israel was really not responding. And in the end, they said enough. And so what they're doing is establishing buffer zones in their neighboring countries with countries with whom they don't have peace agreements. I think that can be avoided. I think it can be avoided, but it's going to take a great effort, and the government of Lebanon cannot depend on Iran. It can't depend on a regional agreement to solve this problem. The government of Lebanon is going to have to do it, perhaps mostly by itself with some outside help, but they're going to have to do the hard work. When we heard from Mark earlier, there is an economic component of this, a political, social component, the Lebanese state showing up and establishing a presence, having state schools instead of Hezbollah schools in the south, having government hospitals and clinics instead of, IRGC clinics in the south. All that's necessary, but Israel, ended its occupation in 2000, withdrew from Lebanon, and Hezbollah didn't go away. They, as they famously said, the road to Jerusalem runs through Zabadani. So they're going to serve Iran by helping to murder 500,000 Syrians in the service of Iran and the Assad regime. And then later they're going to liberate Jerusalem. This isn't about, occupation or anything of the sort. This is about dominating the state. So, ultimately, I think Israel is going to have a presence there for some time. I think what we can hope for is that there will be some momentum, some process built that will result in restrained and constrained Israeli behavior in Lebanon as the government of Lebanon picks up the slack, right, and starts to do the work. But the government of Lebanon for decades has delayed all sorts of difficult decisions. And yes, it's institutional. Yes, it's deep state. Yes, it's the threat of being murdered. I think everyone understands this. And yet, once again, Israel changed on October 7th. And it's going to be really hesitant to do what Mark suggested, which is, what the United States has always asked Israel to do, take the risk for peace. They're not really in the mood. 70% of Israelis actually say they want Israel to continue whacking Hezbollah in Lebanon. And that's the general mood. If this shows promise and there's momentum, then I think there will be U.S. pressure. And I think, as we saw during the Oslo days, the vast majority of Israelis hop on the peace train. Now, maybe this has changed with demography, but I think there's a lot of Israelis who would like to see a changed dynamic in the north.
Thank you, David. Mark, a question from Salah Merai. Do you believe the state of Lebanon would ever be able to assert its authority over all parts of Lebanon in light of its sectarian structure?
Of course, the sectarian structure is a complication that undermines state authority, because we go back to consociational agreements instead of state authority. So it is a problematic, not a helpful element for sure for implementing state authority. And therefore, this is why holding on to the constitutional agreement of Taif and then building a parliament out of sectarian quotas are fundamental changes, along with issues of decentralization and proper governance, because those things would allow for a change in dynamic. The thing that happened since 1990 till today is that all authority has been concentrated in unique leaders within every sect, and then those dominated the executive authority as well as parliament. So we ended up with 5 or 6 people deciding on behalf of all the Lebanese based on their personal interests. And those are the people still fighting to be kingmakers in the system instead of an operational independent judiciary as well as military and others, which General Hello just referred to in terms of delegation of authority to officers to be able to take action within their scope. Overall, I think the state, yes, can reclaim its role. I have a sense that the project of Iran has been defeated regionally. The issue now is how to contain it in Lebanon, and I don't think anyone will agree to allow the Iranians to reconstruct such a network or a hegemonic position within the region. The big choice now on Lebanon is, do we go for peace or do we settle for ceasefires? And this is where I am a proponent of peace, because I think we need to end Lebanon's exposure to conflict constantly within this region that has allowed the small state to become a playground for every regional conflict in the Middle East. Therefore, that's where I go back to changing the operating system, where we start talking about building a culture of peace within Lebanon that is basically talking about the capabilities of not only ending the war, but building forward so Lebanon becomes a strategic asset for everyone to try and connect through the region instead of abusing. And that requires asserting state capabilities militarily and provision of public services as well as financially and otherwise. And I think those will go hand in hand. Now, to solve the major issue, which is Hezbollah's arms and the Israeli occupation is a prominent element in that, I don't think the Israelis in any way or form would do any operation to finish Hezbollah off all across Lebanon. I think we heard the commander of the Israeli army saying that exactly. But protecting their borders and doing that, what they call a buffer zone, which is basically an occupation of Lebanon, that would require the Lebanese state to upgrade its abilities and willingness to take action on the military operations of Hezbollah, which we support. Unfortunately, for that to happen, we need a lot of support for the Lebanese state, but also paving the way through a political process that says, this is the agreement, this is the framework, and I think this is exactly what the state is trying to do in DC. Put a framework and a path forward to make sure that if we take that new path, every action that is taken is given more legitimacy and more confirmation, and the Israelis are committed to retaliate positively towards that, no matter what happens to their election. I think that is the path forward that the negotiation is supposed to deliver. It is not a negotiation for a ceasefire. This is not 2024 or 2006. It is a different objective, which I'm asking the state to actually do, is get us to a political agreement that is signed between Lebanon and Israel so that we end any excuse of operational and military actions that are legitimate in any way or form from both sides on Lebanese territory.
Thank you, Mark. This is very interesting. General Hello, a question to you. Serge Yazigi is asking, we need to give the army the means to assume its role. Why is this not happening?
Thank you, Serge, for this question. But let me tell you the real facts. We are living on American military support and aids since 2005 because our defense budget is not sufficient to buy weapons or to let's say to draw a strategy on a long run, because more than 75% of the budget is spent on salaries and the rest is spent on food and the basic logistical support. So the US aids and David raised this issue, was about between $2 and $3 billion. Thanks to this aid, we have a very strong artillery. We have 300 guns. We have now an air force. Of course, it's not an air force that matches Israel, but it is quite enough for ground support of the troops. And this air force is equipped with intelligent ammunitions, and it has proven its efficiency more than once. So this capability, unfortunately, is not unfolded to the public, because the morale of the public is always toward that the Lebanese army is weak and it can't do anything. It's not true. We did a lot of things. I'm retired since 15 years, but the Lebanese army achieved a lot of huge goals at a time when all Arab armies were doing nothing. We were the first army to face Al-Qaeda, and we faced ISIS in North Lebanon on a 250 square kilometers area without practically air support and without help of any other army. So the army is capable, and the issue is not an issue of weapons. It is an issue of strategy. This is what I mentioned before, and Mark also mentioned a lot of elements of the strategy: economical, education, hospital, etc. We don't see a strategy at the level of the government. And in any strategy, even a defense strategy, the weapons are not the only element that defend the country. You defend the country with a foreign policy. You defend the country with a whole strategy, internal and external. Let me get back with you to 1972, when we had an Israeli attack on September 16 and 17, 1972. Israel attacked South Lebanon, and of course, their target was the PLO. The Lebanese army resisted to Israel by a military strategy of, let's say, based on retarding the Israeli advance. The Lebanese Air Force, we had Mirage at that time, protected Beirut, and our diplomacy was extremely active with France and the United States, and this is what stopped the Israeli attack at that time. This is a strategy. I'm wondering today if we have one, as basic as the one I have described. So the problem is not weapons. The problem is not equipping the army. The problem is a strategy.
Thank you, General Hello. David, a question to you from Alia. How serious are the allegations or promises of financial support attached to progress in negotiations or getting towards a deal that were implied by the message of the US Embassy? Is there any discussion on principles or sequencing happening at any level inside or outside Lebanon? And is the first milestone likely to be funding the LAF to enable it to do its job?
I think they're serious. United States generally pays everyone for signing on to peace with Israel, right? We gave Egypt $2 billion for signing Camp David. Jordan could have asked for anything. They asked for a couple of squadrons of F-16s. UAE, we offered them F-35s and MQ-9 drones. Bahrain forgot to ask for anything when they signed on to the Abraham Accords. And the United States essentially doubled the size of Morocco when they signed on to normalization with Israel by recognizing Moroccan sovereignty over the Western Sahara. So I am sure that there would be, the benefits for Lebanon would be great. And, there is an awful lot of skepticism based on, the past. The United States never once asked the LAF, since we started giving them big pots of money since 2005, never once asked the LAF to do anything about Shiite terrorism. Only, it was designed to really focus on Sunni terrorism. And they did a great job. 2024, it's time to step up. And I think that within the US government, you see Congress right now asking the question, will the LAF step up, right? Is it a matter of more equipment, or is it a matter of will? And we heard, with I think General Haikal was here, and said it publicly. His priority for the LAF is not the disarmament of Hezbollah; it's national unity and the preservation of the LAF. Right. Well, the LAF is going to have to, follow the orders of the government ultimately. But I think that. So getting back to the question, I think that yes. The United States will step up, will fundraise, will provide support not only for the LAF, but other kinds of funding. But as you know, all this has been contingent on performance. When I was in government, we wouldn't give Lebanon an INF program because Lebanon always refuses to do economic reforms. And it's done a couple with the new government, but and Saudi Arabia is not giving you money either. They're not giving you any money because they know it's going to disappear in the wasteland of corruption that helped cause the financial collapse. But if you do the work, there will be countries, including the United States, that step up, I think, in a big way. Yes. So that's the answer to number one. Number two.
Is there any discussion on principles or sequencing happening at any level inside or outside Lebanon? And is the first milestone likely to be funding the LAF?
Yeah, I mean, I think the LAF is most likely first. I mean, actually, there's been a pot of humanitarian funding. I think the United States just released a small amount by any standard, a couple 100 million, maybe 200 million. Lebanon has, a lot more needs than that. But yes, I mean, there is a discussion. I think, Ed Gabriel just wrote a piece. Ed Gabriel of American Task Force for Lebanon just wrote an article talking about sequencing in the national interest. There are people who are thinking about it. I am sure, our State Department has been, let's say, eroded a little bit. Fewer folks over there these days, but I think the U.S. government is starting seriously to think about how to sequence this going forward, and that's what the negotiations are about. And whether the U.S. government is thinking about it, I know that Israel's thinking about it, and I should hope that Simon Karam and Hakmeh and Nada Hamad are thinking about it as well.
Thank you, David. I'll take two more questions and then maybe we'll conclude. So Saib Zain is asking, Mike, if you could take that question. Saib Zain is asking a basic question. If the Iranian regime remains in place, why would Tehran agree to the disarmament of Hezbollah, which effectively represents both its front line and its rear line? In other words, what realistic incentive would lead Iran to give up its most important regional leverage?
Nothing.
Short and clear.
I think they invested 40 years. I think Hezbollah for Iran is irreplaceable. As long as Iran has the strategy that it currently has, even if they are disarmed, they will continue to try and maintain that privileged role like they do with the Shiite opposition in Bahrain or other places. So I think they will continuously, and if you talk to any Iranian, they'll tell you the history of the empire. And I don't think that this will ever change, no matter who rules Tehran. So I think the only alternative is, again, the state reasserting its authority on every level. The issue of disarmament requires that the Lebanese state receive a lot of support. For the Lebanese state to receive that support and trust, they have to commit to taking Lebanon from a confrontation to the path towards peace. And that is what I think the current government is doing with the president. And this is where I think charting or writing up an agreement, a pathway to it with the right sequencing will get us there gradually. And people will start to realize that Lebanon is doing a U-turn on its course from confrontation towards peace.
Thank you, Mike. Maybe another question before we move to General Helou and the question on the strategy, from Ayal Abdullah. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. On what premises are you completely avoiding the Greater Israel Project, which is causing a threat to the entire nation and Levant, in your opinions?
You know, I am not in the mind of the Israelis, but what I know is that in Israel, you have a biblical current, but also you have much more rational people. I think that this is a media issue. It is not realistic at all. And maybe the issue is raised just for pressure. I don't know. But let me remind you history. You know, when Israel has been founded in 1948, till now Israel has no constitution. Why? Because the rational people who founded Israel and who came from Europe and who believed in the European system of democracy and of governance and so on, they wanted a constitution. But the religious people did not accept, because in this constitution, the borders of Israel should be mentioned, and they did not accept. And also, they wanted that the Torah should be the source of any law. But finally, the rational people prevailed, and I think they are prevailing now. And the way Israel is developing and getting more and more stronger and let's say prevalent, it is because of these people and not because of the religious ones. And you know, the GDP of Israel is about I don't know, maybe $500 billion.
Yes.
So this is not a religious issue. It's not the result of the greater Israel. It's the
But
result of let's say, rationale.
isn't what's happening in Syria worrying you?
It is a security issue in Syria. It is not the greater Israel. It is a security issue. It is because they don't trust the current Syrian regime. And I think that the United States intervened here to stop them from advancing more and more. And I remind you that a meeting occurred between President Trump and Mr. Netanyahu on April 6, 2025, where Mr. Netanyahu was summoned to stop bombarding Syria, and he let's say he responded positively to that. So it's not an issue of greater Israel. It's an issue of security first and last.
Thank you, General. Also a question to you before we end with the concluding remarks. In your reference to the lack of a strategy, how can you please spell out the 3-4 main headlines, high-level elements of the strategy that you would like to see developed and implemented?
Well, the first element of any strategy should be to determine who is the enemy and what are the risks. And the problem is that the Lebanese do not agree on that. Okay, so we have to determine the risks and to determine how to face these risks. This is the basics of any strategy, either military or civilian. The second element should be the development of remote areas, because, and Mark raised this issue, the remote areas, they felt all the time since independence till now that they are not in Lebanon. Either they feel they are in Syria, or they feel that they are close to Israel much more than they are close to Beirut. So the priority should be given for development of these areas first. And the third element of the strategy is education. Education is extremely important. Education doesn't mean push people to think the same way, all of them. But education is a backbone for economy. It's a backbone for the military. It's a backbone for everything.
But these
This
are all
is,
very long term. But these are all
of
very
course,
long
any
term
strategy,
elements.
is on the long run. You have no immediate strategy. Every immediate strategy will fall short. It will not continue. If it should be sustainable, it should be on the long run.
And at the security
Unfortunately, the
level,
only time we had a strategy, it was during the mandate of President Fuad Shahab. He put the basics that we are still working on now, and nothing happened after.
and at the security level, elements of a strategy at the security level on short and medium term.
Well, I think that security in Lebanon, regardless of Hezbollah, is not so bad. You know, criminality is not, if you compare to what's going on around us and even in the rest of the world, I think that we are not in a very bad situation. We can go by night everywhere, every place we want to go. The security is not the problem. The problem is defense and not security.
Thank you. David, concluding remarks. What are the realistic milestones for a pathway to an agreement, to a sustainable agreement between Lebanon and Israel? What would you say are the main milestones?
I think they got to go incremental. I think they can map out, you know, a trajectory that this can take. And once again, sequencing is going to matter greatly, both, you know, sequencing, implementation. But let's start at the easy place, right? There's 12 points along the border that can be determined. The Syrians who own Sheba farms can actually recognize sovereignty over Sheba farms, and you've solved your border. And this should, and you can delineate it, and this will put aside all the critics out there who were just at Khalil about the greater Israel. You know, if they're just delineating a border with you, which I think they want to do, it might imply that they're not interested in staying indefinitely in your country. Yeah, listen, this is gonna be, it should be easy, but it's not gonna be easy, right? There's a lot of moving parts, and a lot of regional actors. It's not just Iran, right? You already have advice solicited or otherwise from Saudi Arabia, who's telling you what to do in this process. You know, it's going to be quite complicated in the end of the day. So, listen, I think the key thing is just to try and keep it on track, keep the United States, the Trump administration engaged, and stick with it. And you know, this is not a place you thought you'd find yourself in, you know, 2 years ago. We've been talking about ever since the pager operation, a moment of opportunity for Lebanese sovereignty. And, you know, now this is where the rubber hits the road. The Israelis are going to have to step up and show they want it, but even more so, the Lebanese are going to have to step up.
Thank you, David. Mark, in a minute, what do you think are the immediate priorities that the Lebanese authorities should focus on?
Getting a framework for the negotiation and setting a national goal of achieving peace. I think that's what they need to make very clear so they win more allies and they make sure that everyone's aligned on one objective. And I think whoever doesn't want that objective can become the opposition. And I think that is the split that is going to be happening in Lebanon now, because we need to get ready internally to adopt a new strategy. And we need to get ready externally to be able to execute that strategy. And I think what we're doing now since the 2nd of March till today's the 12th of May, for the past 2 months and 10 days, basically we've been changing course for an entire country. And I think that is the focus. I think the Lebanese have to be vocal, organize, and get ready, as well as parliamentary blocs and political parties, to say if they want a ceasefire or a peace and make their choice. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. General Halou, your concluding remarks. What are the immediate priorities that the Lebanese government should do on the security front? You talked about convening the Higher Council of Defense, the Higher Defense Council.
Yes, I already answered this question. We should implement a plan to restore the sovereignty of the states in areas where they want this, and to make these areas no-go area for Hezbollah military activities, of course. I'm not talking about the supporters of the civilians. And in order to prove to the free world that is helping us that we deserve to be helped.
What about the southern suburbs of Beirut?
The southern suburbs of Beirut geographically are not in Beirut. Okay, so yes, Yes, of course. The city of Beirut is not the southern suburbs.
Of course, but I mean, what about it? Do you believe that the state can regain operational control over there?
I told you, it is a step-by-step tactic.
So
You
step
should
two.
start with areas where you are prevailing and to render these areas a no-go zone for Hezbollah. And then in the step after, we go step by step, either the southern suburbs of or South Lebanon or the northern Bekaa.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen, thank you for a very, very interesting conversation. Thank you to all of the attendees. I mean, it's been an hour and a half, and I have so many other questions, but we'll stop here. Thank you very much. I apologize from the people whose questions I was unable to address, and see you soon in another session, hopefully. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.